I can't remember if I've told you the name of our podcast. It's Muppet Sex and Trauma.
Oh yeah, no, like that's the show. I mean, the show really is Muppet Sex and Trauma, and it's great because of it.
Hi, friends.
Howdy, y'all.
Hi.
And welcome to Muppet Sex and Trauma. I'm Sara Ezzat. I make the Fat Culture Critic videos on YouTube.
I'm Josh Gosdin, and I've actually been a Muppet this whole time.
You know, I'm not at all surprised.
Few would be.
And we have a new guest with us today. This is Aranock.
Hi.
Hi, Aranock.
You might know her from her beautiful, incredible YouTube work, or you may know her as Jessie Gender's co-writer. What else do you want to?
I'm just an artist. I work in a lot of things. I pop up all over the place, mostly in video essay spaces.
Yes. And I thought, considering you have a beautiful piece about queer relativity and queer time, I thought that would be a great. You'd be a great guest for this weird queer time episode.
Yeah, I can see the connections to queer relativity for sure. I kind of wish that I'd watched the show before I wrote that, because this would have been a good thing to pull from for even just like extra visuals.
Unrealized Reality was written by David Kemper and directed by Andrew Prouse. John is hanging out alone in a spacesuit near Moya, observing a wormhole when he gets pulled into it. He awakes to find himself in some other space, on a lone iceberg with a black-eyed stranger. Einstein, as John calls him, is related to the ancient aliens responsible for John's wormhole knowledge. They've been observing his wormhole travels, and they're worried. Einstein needs John to understand the danger that wormholes present, and so he takes John on a tour of John's memories and of possible alternate realities that could result from errors with wormholes. Wormholes are about the relationship between time and space, and if he does things wrong, he could go back and change history, change himself, change his friends, or change his reality to one of infinite unrealized realities that could have been. Finally, when John understands the true danger enough to fear his knowledge, Einstein helps him to take a wormhole back. Back where, though, because when John opens his eyes, he finds he hasn't returned to Moya, but to Earth, to floating above the Earth, once again alone in a spacesuit. And that is where we leave him for now. So, initial thoughts?
This is one of the first episodes that really dives into what the wormholes are capable of. It's very dense because they go to a bunch of different places with a lot of different implications for like the characters and who they could have been if certain things were a little bit different. And so, but what I really think is it's an episode about Crichton's sort of obsession with the wormholes and how that's kind of disconnecting him from the rest of the ship. I think that whole opening section where you see like Aaron working on trying to understand English properly, and I can't remember who it is who says, like, if you want to understand them, you need to speak the language of wormholes instead.
Mm-hmm. It's Gianna.
Yeah, it's Gianna. You know, I think it's one of the more interesting things about Crichton to me as a character is that he is obsessive in a way that is, like, negative often. It's a bit of a character flaw, and he can't really get over the trauma of being pulled away from his home fully. And so he ends up often like there's so many instances of him across the show, you know, prioritizing trying to get to the wormholes over the safety of the rest of the crew or other people because he just cannot think about anything else. And I think that makes for an interesting flaw for a main protagonist, that the primary thing that's motivating him is also like a little bit unhealthy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's very classically tragic in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's brought to his own end through his own choices and his own obsession, kind of a thing. I mean, he's not dead or anything, but this was so Sara was saying in our last recording that there was a notion of having me do a reaction to this, and I can absolutely see why. A fantastic cliffhanger. I love a good cliffhanger, and Farscape does it really well. B, we got to see Zahn again. We got to see Crace again. We got to see Jewel again. I was very happy. We got to go all the way back to the damn premiere. And we got to see some really fun actor work and different makeup and different character sets. throughout the the realities. That was a lot of fun too. I had a blast with it, and I really enjoy. I mean, I'm a sucker for a the fate of the world, fate of the universe as we know it, boils down to a dramatic conversation between two characters plot element, which pops up a lot in sci-fi and fantasy kind of a thing. But that that whole iceberg conversation between John and I guess we'll call him Einstein, that was a hoot. I enjoyed the fuck out of that.
Yeah, we didn't react to this episode, but we will react to the next two.
Crichton is such an interesting character to have talking with this godlike figure, because he's sort of irrelevant at baseline, and that makes for an interesting combo when paired with omnipotent power beings around him, because he just doesn't care enough to sort of respect them or pretend to be deferential. And I think that's a fun. It makes for a fun dynamic in their conversations.
Yeah, John and his godlike aliens.
Yeah, and him just being like, I don't fucking care that you're God. That's so cool for you, dude. Like, it's just, there's something about the way that John is so nonchalant that makes those conversations even more fun.
Yeah. I love John. He's
He's great.
He's a great character, yeah.
And this is the kind of character that you can have a conversation with godlike aliens and just be like, well, fuck you then.
Yeah, no, like he just doesn't care. I also just really love Josh was talking about the going back to the pilot, but I love that it goes back to the pilot and it manages to do such a good job of making these altered versions of the scenes feel like they naturally fit what was in the pilot.
Mm-hmm. But I love that this whole episode is basically about, no, you have to take this seriously. No, John, you really have to take this seriously.
Do you understand the implications of you going home?
Yeah, fear is the correct answer.
Yeah, no, it's great. I love that I love that his whole journey is that very Greek tragedy. Like, the only way he can get home is by risking destroying it. Like, there's these layers to that I find interesting. Because Crichton is very Odysseus-esque.
Yeah.
The structure of the whole show is very Odyssey-esque at times.
Yeah, if you mix Odysseus with Dorothy Gale. Yeah.
Which they called out in this episode specifically.
Yeah, but I have been talking all along in this podcast about the Wizard of Oz parallels.
There's a lot of Wizard of Oz parallels. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that it's the primary sort of thing that they've drawn on really for John's story is he's Dorothy Gale from Kansas. He wants to go home after being sucked in a
he's
space
Dorothy
tornado.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like he's Dorothy from Kansas if we really looked at the implications of being ripped away from your home and thrust into a violent, confusing, strange other world.
Fascist.
And then it throws in the fascism and everything else. But Farscape is a Superman story where he's had his powers removed. Like, structurally, in a lot of ways, Crichton is very Clark Kent.
Ooh, yeah,
but like with everything in Farscape, it's like Clark Kent through a mirror darkly. And rather than making Crichton less caring or less heroic, it shows the frayed edges of that and how trauma can still mess with the most strong, stable people. I think it's a very smart choice to have. Well, but like Crichton at the start of the show, he doesn't have a lot of issues going on. I mean,
Once upon a time.
Yeah. Not
by the time that we're here, no. But I find that interesting. I find that an interesting journey of how far can you push that character before they break? And there's definitely some bits later in the show where Crichton breaks a little.
Well,
yeah.
to a large degree has already broken a little, and so part of the question also becomes like, how do you put something back together? How do you put a person back together?
And I find that way more relatable than I think a lot of attempts at exploring trauma are. I like that Crichton. I like that Crichton sometimes makes decisions that are based very much in his trauma that like hurt the people around him sometimes. And that sounds like it'd be a negative thing, but I think it's a more honest portrayal where it doesn't treat him as evil or bad for any of the trauma that he struggles with. But there are times where he makes decisions and it's like, hey, dude, you need to consider the people around you and you need to examine like where that's coming from and where those trauma responses aren't helpful.
Crucially, he's not the only one. Like they're all.
Oh yeah, everyone is.
Everyone in this crew is deeply traumatized, and they've all made stupid or hurtful decisions out of it. And speaking of stupid and hurtful decisions, we should start with the opening bit. And I want to talk about Dargo and John's conversation. Somebody has finally called him out on the stupid drugs.
Yeah, frickin' finally.
Yeah.
That particular subplot, Aranock, has been annoying me for a couple of episodes now. It's been annoying me in the way of it up until this episode definitely seemed like the show was co-signing Naranti's efforts to sort of
erase Aaron from
and like
I didn't like that either. Like when I was watching that block of episodes, I couldn't remember that this episode was kind of the culmination of all of that. But yeah,
not have him deal with shit, but have him like run from shit or avoid shit, and that a lot of it was also accomplished involuntarily or non-consensually was also really like, why do I like this character? Why do I care about this character again? So then Dargo comes in and validates my perspective in this episode.
Yeah, Naranti's a hard character for me, kind of in general.
Yeah.
She's rough.
Yeah.
I like that the show is full of like, I'd call them spiky characters. They're very rough on the outside. There's some softness in the middle there, but like they're very spiky, but they also stick. Like they stick to you.
They're all trauma bonded. That's why that's why Naranti just kind of like appeared and joined the crew.
Like I think this episode does that well. I think there's a reality there of someone being as hurt and messed up as John is. Seeking unhealthy ways of trying to process that trauma and heal from that trauma. And I think that the show's very much about how you have to confront the past constantly. Like, this is a theme that shows up over and over and over again. And it's also inherent to the whole, like, you can't avoid the uncomfortable realities that you exist within. You can't just run away from that. You have to deal with it. You can't ignore the fascism on the horizon. Yeah. You have to fight it.
Not that we know anything about that at all.
Yeah, it's not relatable at all, but
Lord of mercy.
But I love that it's Dargo that calls him out because Dargo is a person who has done a lot of running from trauma, and John has confronted him on his shit before. So they now have this relationship where they can call each other out and be this really healthy masculine friendship with one another.
And I think it has to be Dargo. And I think it's best when it's Dargo, because I think Dargo more so than anyone else has like a very similar element of trauma and trying to forget it and realizing that he, the only way to deal with it isn't to push it away, but to confront it and understand it.
And because of his and John's close personal relationship too, like he definitely takes a very empathetic way of calling John out in this, He actually calls him out in a way that maybe a couple of other characters wouldn't, but B, does it empathetically in maybe a way that a couple of other characters wouldn't. So it's a really great balance of, just at this point, it seems like the kind of support that John needs. And I really loved Dargo's question when he goes, "Is it working? Are you forgetting?" Like that was, and that's a question that I asked a couple of episodes ago. I was like, this doesn't seem to be doing anything.
Yeah, and then the whole how much perspective have you lost?
Yeah.
That is
line
a
is so
really good
good.
line. Yeah.
That's a great line. Because I think when you run from something, you inherently mess up your perspective. You have to ignore it.
I also I did not the call out at the beginning of the episode of to what word Aaron was trying to pronounce did not go unnoticed. She's trying to say the word existential.
Some writers use subtlety.
I mean,
and they're all cowards.
A spade is a spade, man.
No, but I mean, like sometimes it's good to just be outright with that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's fun.
And Chiana calling Aaron out is a nice dynamic as well.
That's fun. Yeah, I think that was a good choice. He's the right character to be talking to her.
Yeah, it's one of the things about this show that I wish we had more of. Is I wish we had more of the women dynamic with one another.
Yeah, I mean the show, I think it's not disinterested with women's perspectives, but it is distracted from them. I don't know how to describe it really, because it's like at times the women can be really, really interestingly written, and then at other times it's like they couldn't care less about a woman's perspective on violence that we experience or things that are going on, and I find that interesting.
It strikes me as a very like 90s feminism trap that a lot of shows of the era fell into, of trying to elevate or empower their female characters by surrounding them with men and thus demonstrating that they can exist on a same level or in a similar arena. But it totally misses the point of what can make a relationship like what we saw Chiana and Aaron express in this episode really special, you know? Like that kind of only someone who has a shared life experience with me has the best opportunity of understanding me, like on the onset, you know.
And it's one of those things where it's useful to have women in the writers' room.
Oh yeah,
because you're just going to get, even though like. That being said, the last episode that was so utterly trash on gender issues was written by a woman. So having a woman there doesn't guarantee.
You don't just need a woman, you need women who know what they're talking about.
And ideally more than one woman.
No, it's that is frustrating. I think there's just elements of that time period seep into the show, definitely.
Yes.
Often.
Yeah,
in ways that feel antithetical to the rest of the show's messaging.
it is very of its time, and in any number of ways that it is ahead of its time as well. It's also very of its time because ultimately, and you've said this very well a few times. Like the show is still written by late 20th, early 21st century white men mostly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and it comes across like it's there. It's definitely there.
But once you are trying to write.
Which is part of the point and part of what we can commend and also part of what we can critique.
And what makes it interesting to talk about. If it was perfect, this would be boring.
Honestly, one of the interesting bits of this episode is that they have some of the actors playing other gendered characters during the alt universe. Mm-hmm. Everybody's somebody else section.
Yes, in fact, I believe, Josh, you said you had wished to see Dargo in drag.
And here we go. Not just drag, but jewel drag.
Yeah, this was his particular choice. The actor was asked who he wanted to be, and he said jewel because he wanted to have breasts, which is one of those weird moments.
Like, good job, Anthony, because it worked for you.
Yeah.
He was, and like the sachet and shimmy that he was doing, every move he was making, like his shoulders were everywhere, and I loved it.
Yeah, he always does love a chance to play something out of the ordinary.
A little, perhaps you might use the word queer.
Well, yes. I mean, this show is fundamentally queer.
I think that's also why I didn't like, because obviously as a trans woman, I have some pretty strong feelings about the like man in dress style comedy nonsense. And I wouldn't say that this episode really dips into that at all with Dargo in that moment. Which is good, which is nice.
Yeah, he really is just doing Jewel to the
like he's just
infinite.
Yeah, Like it doesn't do the thing of like, whoa, man. Like it doesn't engage in any of that nonsense, and that's very nice.
Really, really glad / wish you would have been there for the last episode.
Yeah, again, I really just didn't want to subject any of my trans women friends to having to watch something that's
No, like bullet dodged, but also destroy it.
I don't remember that episode, thankfully.
Don't bother. Don't try.
And I'm not sure I want to.
no.
Yeah, I watched the show a little bit like in the background. So there's episodes like I remember really strongly, this being one of them, and then there's episodes I really don't remember, and they're almost always the like bad about gender or bad about race or those episodes where it's just like I'm tuned out. It's too bad.
Yeah, that's one way to watch something and just like, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we should start on the stuff with Einstein then.
Yeah.
So yes, I suggested you watch it twice because there's just so much exposition.
I'm a Star Trek veteran. I was raised on Star Trek, and that is sort of my sci-fi foundation. And specifically, I was raised on 90s Trek, on Berman era Trek. And one of the key characteristics of understanding 90s Star Trek was understanding that the producers were terrified that their viewers were morons. And that unless they were specific and explicit about things, it wasn't worth creating a story that had something that would require viewers to make an imaginative leap. So there's definitely sometimes in Star Trek of the 90s where it's like, yeah, but why didn't you just do this? And literally the answer is we were afraid the audience wouldn't get it.
And and a lot of the writers from Farscape are writers from that era of Trek who wanted to experiment.
That said, I really appreciated the flashbacks in this episode. Like, it didn't feel heavy-handed. I didn't feel like I was being spoon-fed. They were making so many rapid-fire callbacks, especially during the conversation with Einstein, that especially for episodic television of the era, I feel like those flashbacks were necessary. They were helpful, and they were presented as John
relevant as well.
Yes,
it was clever. It was clever usage of resources to maximize meaning while avoiding confusion.
And it was framed as John's memories, so it also like it was baked into the story. It wasn't just like, let's explain to the viewers what we mean. It was John.
It's like diegetically coherent to the moment. Yeah,
couldn't have said it better. Like we're in it with John.
Yeah, because the show is very, very good when it comes to John, at least at entering true subjectivity and not trying to pretend like the camera's pure objectivity. We get a lot of stuff with John, especially in terms of like inner head state that most shows wouldn't like lean into in that way. And this episode uses that particularly well.
Yeah, this is one of the few times we've had real like in his mind without doing directly mind palace stuff.
Yeah.
And I like how they use the original footage, which is sensible for like cost effective and stuff, but they still managed to give us enough of a change with John to get enough of perspective on sort of reminding us where we've been and how we got here.
How far all of these characters have changed and moved since then. Yeah, and what the cost of John changing any of that is, again, expressed through the emotional ties rather than just being like, oh, the universe is at stake. It's like, no, the interpersonal relationships we've built across 3 seasons are at stake. And that's more interesting.
Yeah. We go very personal. And even when there's the like completely changing the universe thing and changing Earth, when we go back, when we have that scene when Wayne Pigram plays Jack Crichton.
I thought that's who that was.
That is who that is.
He did a decent Southern American accent.
Yeah, I think that it's enough to be uncanny to fall into sort of uncanny valley that you're like, that's not Jack, but it is, but it's not. But doing with the as if Scarens have been on Earth and changing that, like that is a huge change to the universe. But we see it through this intensely personal thing of the relationship between John and his dad.
Mm-hmm.
It's again, it's economic storytelling that understands how to ground very, very high concept discussions in very, very personal stakes that anyone can understand, because everyone can understand the relationship between Crichton and his dad. It's something they're invested in already. They aren't necessarily going to be like getting every single detail. I would say for a 2000s audience, I think we're at the point now where a lot of concepts around multiversal theory, alternate realities, and time travel are so ubiquitous in pop culture that it doesn't need to be explained. But for people who weren't around in even the early 2000s, because I'm not that old, but like I noticed there's a disconnect. Like a lot of that stuff had to be explained just because people otherwise couldn't even understand the basic like process of what's happening. And the show does a good job of minimizing its plot dumpingness text-wise by doing it visually or doing it with examples.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right, by grounding it emotionally as well. So it also makes us give a damn about the exposition.
We care what's going on in those exposition scenes because we care about the emotion. And like I think that's what makes Farscape really good. That's what any good sci-fi knows how to do, or fantasy or anything like that. And I think a lot of media is lately, not all, but like just a lot of mainstream media lately very much lacks that care to intersect the sort of plot construction stuff with the very personal. And so you get these stories that feel very like, and now we are having the personal conversation scene. This is the scene where personal conversations happen. And now we are having plot. And this is the plot scene. Like it just, it makes it feel very clunky, and it doesn't have that nice flow that you get. Whereas when you look at more like dense filmmaking, like something like this, or like any Bong Joon-ho's films, for example, do a really good job of doing this. Yeah, like really, really good writing, I find, has those five purposes to one sentence.
Everything, everywhere, all at once.
Oh, perfect example. Yeah.
That is the piece of media I think most similar to this episode.
Mm-hmm. And again, it's like even with the Einstein stuff, there's still like personal emotions embedded into a very emotionless character just because of the relationship it has to like Crichton. What's that line? The fear is the correct answer. You know, like that is very much still grounded in the personal as much as it's saying like, yes, you can destroy the universe and that's a big bad problem. But it's also like, it's saying, hey, Crichton, you've been jumping face first, head first into this thing repeatedly.
Yeah.
You are playing with fire, intergalactic destructive fire. And that is an issue with your personal character flaw. You need to have some fear of this. And that's fun. Like that's good writing because it's got those multiple purposes served at the same time.
You are playing dice with the universe.
Yeah. And the price of losing
and
is
God
literally
is
everything.
Yeah.
The godlike aliens are annoyed with you.
It's been, he grasps obviously that his life is in danger by virtue of having this knowledge. He grasps that it would be bad, like just, all caps general, if the Peacekeepers or the Scarens got a hold of him.
Either fascist group had instant teleportation armies. Yeah.
So for him, as far as he's concerned, he just has to stay safe and then he's fine. And
he can do whatever
like,
the fuck he wants.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Einstein's like, no, my friend.
Or he's just like, there is no fine, so fuck it. I'm just trying to keep all the plates spinning. I'm trying to keep dancing on the edge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, John, stop dancing and think about where you're putting your feet.
Yeah. And remember, if that ice goes, so does all the other ice behind it. And it's a chain reaction of bad. Like, Yeah, no, I think again, like also just showing Crichton like alternate versions of him and his relationship to his dad, or his relationship to Aaron, or his relationship to the ship. Like each of these cements the cost in the personal again and again and again. I will also taking the opportunity to be like, this is the consequence for the universe.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There was a moment, and I feel it feels like it was probably an accident, like it wasn't on purpose. But if it was on purpose, chef's kiss. Even though that it was on accident, it also still was really impactful to me as a viewer. The first time that Einstein throws the pebble into the water,
Yeah.
the water splashes the camera, and
Oh.
like water is dripping
You know
down the
what?
lens.
I'm going to make an argument that this might not be an accident in the same way that I would argue that Agent Smith's glasses showing the light in specifically the park scene in Matrix Reloaded. Okay, there's a scene in Matrix Reloaded. Neo and Smith have their big fight in the park where there's millions of Smiths. But at the start of the scene when they're just talking and Smith is walking towards Neo, you can fully see, and again, this is the Matrix, thousands and thousands and thousands of shots across both, like all three films, where they have glasses that would be reflecting studio lights and stuff, and they digitally remove that. But this one scene, for the entire scene across multiple shots, does not do that. It's not a mistake that they would make. In the same way that like Farscape's pretty good about having its camera disconnected from this reality. I would argue that both are an indication of like that sort of higher comprehension of the structure of the world. In that like Smith is aware that he's inside of a narrative, in the same way that like Einstein is aware that he's in a structural like time flow that is alterable. And so having it splash the camera is like drawing attention to cameras and editing as time restructuring.
I hope you're right, because it also, for me, it had the very like visceral audience impact of no place is safe from this danger, including
Yeah.
us.
It's a fun choice. And I think again, it coming back to that sort of personal element, right?
Yeah.
It's saying to you as the audience, like, think about these characters that you care about. Now imagine this happens to them. Now you've been splashed too. Like, you're also affected by this, even though it's just fiction, right? Fiction still affects us emotionally, and I think that's a fun way of reading it. I think it's a really powerful way of reading it.
It could also be one of those happy accidents where the thing happens and the editor's like, I like it.
That's what I mean. Like if that's the type of thing that it might have been an accident the day of, but that doesn't mean that down the line it didn't become a purposeful choice into the
Yeah.
scheme. Yeah.
There's a Farscape is known. It has a lot of the sort of like stuff happens and they just go with it. So yeah, that I could well see them going, hey, I like that. We're going with that shot. And I was just thinking like the thing about the who's in a narrative and thing is this is John being taken into another world to be spoken to by godlike aliens. And who is God in a fictional world?
The writer.
The writer. So this is in many ways John being taken aside by the writers to have a wee little conversation about how this story works.
Definitely valid. It is definitely a valid reading of the scene, and I kind of love that. I like the splash as a reinforcement of that idea. I also like that it continues elements from space metamorphosis dad version of like
Yes.
like, oh, there is consequences to them no longer being in the wormholes. Yeah.
Yeah. And like the sort of new bit of lore we're learning is that the aliens that the ancients that we knew were related to these guys. They were an iteration made to walk in our realm. A neat bit of lore.
And lots of good pulling together of threads that have existed across the entire show in this episode. Emotional threads, but also like practical plot threads, lore threads, like all these things, just pulling them together into something. Because this show doesn't really get to finalize itself in the way that I think it probably deserved. So it does a good job across like the last chunk of like wrapping things up as much as is possible in the times that they have.
Yeah. And we get a whole bunch of flashbacks and flash forwards, which are familiar, very familiar to me because I watched this on so many times. And Aranock has seen it once, so she knows some of where the flash forwards are. And then of course, Josh, you just get random bits of things
that are to come, things that have been, things that will be.
Things. Okay, Galadriel.
I'm so glad you instantly knew what I was talking about. I was like, it's either going to sound really weird or everyone's enough of a Lord of the Rings nerd to understand what I'm talking about. Because I love that speech.
I'm with you, don't worry.
Nerdy references here?
It's more likely than you think.
What I love about Farscape is that it takes elements of the hero's journey and then it just shits on the hero's journey for 5 seasons. Like it really sits down and goes like, being the hero in the hero's journey would suck ass. Actually, it would leave you fully traumatized in a way that would damage your ability to return home, which, you know, with the cliffhanger of this episode, you know that is coming. And
yeah, we're gonna
spoil any details, but it is so interesting. It is so interesting because it takes a lot of the structure of that, right? The structure of Dorothy, the structure of an isekai of like, you've been taken to this other world and you go through trials and tribulations and stuff. But like, Crichton just goes through hell and doesn't come out the same.
I mean, you mentioned Lord of the Rings. Like that also sounds like Frodo's journey to me.
Well, that's a perfect example of why like Campbell is so full of bullshit. Because even contemporary stories that he was pulling from, like Lord of the Rings, which released while he was working on it, you know, and he does touch on Lord of the Rings. Like Lord of the Rings is not really fitting into a lot of his structure of, you know, what a hero's journey is, because like Frodo is permanently disabled from the events of, he has a serious chronic illness that's a result of the Morgul blade hit. He has significant mental illness and like PTSD, and I'm not like pulling that out of nowhere. I mean, it's very technical. He loses a finger. Like he is disabled in many different ways by the end of the journey, and that is a relevant thing that the text talks about. And when they come back to the Shire, right, he doesn't come back emboldened with the elixir to fix everything. The Shire is destroyed. His home is burned down, and so in the book version, you know, and Frodo goes through a tragedy of like, he's come home mostly himself, but his home's not even recognizable either. And then I think the film's just something that I actually think hits harder, which is that Frodo comes home and everything's the same, and he's not. And that really that hits in an emotional place as someone with PTSD, you know, that hits in a very specific place for sure. And I think, yeah, like sending Crichton back to the pilot is the first step in kind of exploring that theme here, where the Crichton of now is a completely different, more jaded, cleverer, like meaner, and not in a bad way, but just like he's got a survival instinct now. And you take him back to that episode 1 context, and he just behaves completely differently, and it definitely like affects the space around him a little bit. And it's so interesting. It's such an interesting contrast. What better way of showing where your deconstruct for the monomyth character is at before they go home than by sending him back to the start of the journey and going, hey, like this has changed him, and not necessarily for the better.
But at the same time, while it has changed him, some things haven't changed because he still ends up in the same place. Like
it's very fun. It's a fun little thing there. Yeah,
he can defend himself with Erin, but not very well. He still ends up in the same place under her knees.
Oh darn!
I had to make the joke. I'm sorry, it was right there.
Well, I mean, he makes a, you know, he tells her he knows about the birthmark on her hip.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and he's unhinged. Like Crichton just has gotten weirder.
Yeah,
one of my favorite things, and this is because this will get commented on in future episodes. Like, yeah, Crichton's just gotten weird, like socially. Across the seasons.
Well, he has had his brain dissected twice and had a person living in his head for a while. And now his enemy is living with him, which is one of the scenes from the beginning that we didn't actually talk about. Is we have a bit of flirtation / alliance between Sikozu and Scorpius.
Yeah, that's getting a lot less subtexty and a lot more texty.
Yeah, that's getting texty. Won't tell you where that goes, but
she is the thirstiest of all thirst, and now he is responding thirstily as well.
Ever since you pointed out the sexual symbolism of John jamming the rod into Scorpius' head under domination in that one episode.
Oh yeah, there's a weird homoerotic tension between John and Scorpius that is not good, but it is there.
I can only ever regard the rod in Scorpius's head as a phallic symbol. So whenever it appears in an episode, I'm always asking myself, what sexual metaphor is being made right now? And in this episode,
phallic object insertions.
Turns it on.
Sikozu is manhandling it, and it goes bing. And I was like, that's.
I know writers use subtext,
and they're all cowards. Yes, it's very much the subtext here is becoming text.
Now, Scorpius is such an interesting antagonist. Just a completely morally ambivalent being. Like, he just doesn't care about morals. It's not even like he's like he just does whatever feels most convenient to his goals in that moment, and he makes for such an interesting character because of that.
He's not evil. He's ruthless.
Yeah, he's amoral. He's not immoral. He's amoral.
He's not. Yeah, I wouldn't say that he's necessarily amoral. I think he is functionally immoral because he just is completely ambivalent to morality. He just doesn't care. He's not even questioning whether something's moral or not. He's just doing whatever he thinks is like beneficial to the goal. I think that's a really fun dynamic because John Crichton is so, I'm a good old American scout, and Scorpius is just like, I literally don't give a shit. Philosophy, never heard of her. Morality, that sounds like something for people that are less busy.
Yeah. He's like,
I
couldn't be me.
Have revenge, and that is all.
For real. Yeah, no, he's like, I've got spite, I've got revenge, and I've got some goals, and I'm accomplishing them.
He's girl boss gaslight gatekeeping everybody?
Yes, yeah. Scorpius gives, like, the queen that comes on a season of RuPaul's Drag Race and is a bitch to everybody, but keeps being like, well, I'm morally right for being a bitch, because it's my opinion.
Scorpius is plain Jane, yes.
That's what makes it so funny as a dynamic, because, like, truly, it is the worst queer, like, community group. It's kind of the dynamic of the ship at this point in the show. And I think that creates a very fun sort of tension within our main cast. I think having Scorpius... I love arcs where the antagonists are put in a position of having to work with the protagonists.
But without a redemption.
Yeah, without redemption. Like, they're just still shit. And it's
Yeah.
more fun that way. Like, I honestly, I love when a villain's just a villain. There are times where people just suck, and that's okay to represent. And that can be really fun to lean into when you're writing and playing them. And Scorpius just sucks. Like, as a
He's
person,
so good at it.
sorry, Drag Race is just on my mind because my girlfriend and I have been watching seasons of it, and there's a critique where Santino goes, "You radiate an awful energy that seems to just permeate towards everybody around you." And that's Scorpius.
That is
He's
Scorpius.
radiating an awful energy that just permeates to everybody around him.
He's the opposite of aura.
Charisma isn't.
He's stink maxing instead of
Yeah.
aura maxing.
Well, no, except he does have bag loads of charisma. He is.
He's a fun villain. I love that he's just kind of unrepentantly awful all the time.
Yeah,
and he doesn't care.
And we do get a brief visit from his subbable subs in this episode. We get
Braca.
We get Braca being John's sub instead.
Yeah, who throws himself into the line of fire and then dies looking longingly to his eyes. I caught that too.
And speaking of redemption, we get a visit from Grace.
That was a weird one. I like the well done, brother, and giving him a huge embrace and all that kind of stuff, but also still getting the callback to the original Crace obsession. I always remember Aranock talking about trauma and all that, the meat grinder that John's been through at this point. Like, I always remember the conversation in the first season finale between John and Grace in the the cell separated by the barrier and like just crying at each other. And like John is like, do you understand what you did to me? And Grace actually having some remorse and actually having some guilt. Like, God, that scene.
Grace is another really interesting antagonist. He never really becomes like a purely morally good person. No. He stays this very morally complicated, odd guy who's so much a product of the systems he was brought up in.
Yes.
And only really doing the right thing often because he's like, fuck you, I want to be the oppressor. And it's like such a funny dynamic. He honestly has the same energy as Agent Smith in Matrix Resurrections. Like, in some ways, where he's like, yeah, I'm so excited with you for this fight, but I don't know about this. And so having him die so heroically, sort of, in saving everybody else, and then get to come back here, I think is a fun choice.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's very much old Christ that comes back pre.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what do we think about the interviews? Little perspectives on John. I think it's kind of a neat dynamic.
Such an interesting choice. It's not the last time that in this kind of chunk of the show where it's going to break its format pretty heavily. I don't want to spoil later stuff, but I do think that it's an interesting kind of hint towards that and dynamics that Crichton is going to have to go through in the future. But that sort of thing of him being like scrutinized and talked about and examined for the change that he's gone through and the person that he's become from the perspective of the people that knew him before. It allows them to do some of that stuff in a way that wouldn't be able to be done in just a pure like Crichton has gone back to Earth way, but in a like people who don't even exist anymore can come back and say things about Crichton. And I also love that it presents, people's perspectives of others in a complicated light, right? We talked about Christ, like, coming back with the negative stuff, but Christ also comes back and says, he made me a better captain and stuff. Like, there's these dichotomies that I think are great because a lot of the show is about perception and the limits of comprehension that it can create. And so having so explicit exploration of, like, facets and the way that people have multiple perspectives, even on just one person, is so interesting to me. And I think it's a perfect use of time travel nonsense because you're already in this kind of other way of exploring time and stuff, you may as well lean into that. And I think doing so in a way that is coherent, where the story structure stuff is being reflected by like the medium of film, you know, is it's so cool. Like it's the same thing of like pulling out a second person chapter in the middle of a book, you know, to like hit in a very specific way. This, you know, pulls from a completely different style of editing and of writing from reality TV. Like, interestingly, that's probably the primary influence on this kind of is like documentary work, but also kind of reality TV, like candid interviews. It's so interesting to me as a choice. And it kind of comes back to that point you made with the water getting splashed on the camera, right? Is there's this like breaching of the lines of the fourth wall and the diegetic barrier between the audience and Crichton. And I think it's brilliant filmmaking that uses its.
Oh yeah, it was so compelling, and there is that element as I was reading it. At least the characters from Earth, if not also Zahn and Grace and Jewel, were potentially other members of Einstein's race, who were, because what I got was that a lot of those talking head kind of moments we were experiencing as John was experiencing them.
Yeah, that was my thought as well. Because we get some sort of reactions from John to the experience of those moments.
Yeah. And then as the episode progresses and as the talking heads start saying, you know, plot relevant things, we really get the sense that he is, you know, if this is a godlike alien, that he is conferring with a sort of extra dimensional heavenly host.
They talk a lot about how they had to make this space, and it takes a lot of effort to do that just to be able to talk to John,
and
because their existence is so alien to the thought processes of humans. That's great.
So it's them trying to understand John as much as it is John trying to communicate with them.
I love that. I honestly, like, I think to make a comparison, it's kind of like a story where we found out that ants are fully sentient beings and then try to have a conversation with them. You know what I mean? Like that kind of dynamic of just extreme power differential and perspective differential. And then realizing, oh, wait, these are smart beings in a different way from me.
The original script called for it to be projected, for the interviews to be like projected onto the iceberg, but they just couldn't make it work.
Oh, that would have looked so cool.
This production couldn't make it work, so they had to do it this way.
I have a gift of Killian time.
Hey,
kitty.
I mean, one of my favorite things about television sci-fi is when they're able to successfully make budget limitations work for the story.
Yeah.
Like when they lean into it instead of fighting it like this.
Honestly, like I think understanding that you have a limited budget and then doing the most with that is super, super, super powerful. And I think it sometimes creates some of the most unique art out there. I think being able to just do everything in sci-fi and post with your $100 million per episode or whatever show, it creates a laziness and a lack of like experimentation that limitation tends to, necessitate.
Yeah, a delimitation really can be a challenge that brings something out to overcome.
Yeah, like limitation, I think is what's the quote? Limitation is the something of innovation, parent or something like that.
Makes sense.
That's necessity.
Oh yeah. Necessity is no, but the limitation's the same thing, right? The point is the same. The idea is that like when you don't have any other options, you have to just figure it out, and so what you figure out might be something that's really powerful or unique. I also just think that like the show's dedication to practical effects is why it has aged 10,000 times better than anything that came out even 5 to 6 years after it ended.
Yeah, like I always come back to the fact that Crackers Don't Matter, which started so many ideas for this show, was made because I was a cute kitty.
Oh, that's a weird perspective for me.
Sorry, I was just objecting you to some Crichton vision for a moment. the interminable, experience of self-perception through others' eyes. It's thematically relevant to our discussion.
Listen, Sara, if you can edit in talking heads of everybody who's ever been on our show talking about me.
I don't know that I can do that, but that would be kind of fun. Maybe for the final episode.
Okay.
But yeah, like the Crackers Don't Matter, which was the start of so many ideas for this show. Like Harvey, for one, came out of them not having time because some sets were taking too long to build, so they had to make a bottle episode, and then they just because this is seat of the pants writing, they saw what worked and built on it, and so yeah, limitation is such a gift to storytelling.
Yeah.
And actually, the Talking Heads makes me think about a film that I am definitely the only one here who's seen yet, but a film that was made by one of my, a professor of mine, actually. He made this film called Framing Agnes. That is like, it's kind of a documentary, but kind of breaking the rules of documentary. So it's about, he's a trans man who's done a lot of research in some of the archives. And so he made this film with another couple researchers about this woman, Agnes, who had lied her way into getting surgery at UCLA in the 50s. And he made this film by taking the transcripts of her interviews with the doctor and making it a talk show. And then also took a bunch of files about other patients and also had them turn into a talk show and had them all of these roles performed by contemporary modern trans people playing these people from the 50s. And so it's performed, but then also they have sections talking to the performers, reflecting on the archives of the people that they're playing and the experience and why the choices they make, and they use different film techniques for each of the different things, so it becomes this fascinating sort of reflection on reflection on reflection. That if you can, I think you'd love it, Aranock, because it's it's just sort of like,
that's very up my alley. Yeah.
Yes, it is exactly up your alley. But like the reflection about the way things change and the way things don't and how people are perceived, and it marrying that with film, with using different film techniques and different framing devices, just kind of has this wonderful sort of reflective thing that it puts you in the mood for. And I think that's we get all these perspectives on John while John is getting perspectives on his life, and the way that they talk about him, and both the good things they say about him and a lot of the bad things they say about him are true. I mean, the jokes about his sex life probably can't be both true at the same time, but he is both, incredibly giving and generous and pretty self-centered and vain.
Yeah.
These are both true of John. This is what makes him such an interesting character. It's the real change comes when they're like, they don't remember John, because John being forgettable is just like, no, that would be a different world. That would be a different John.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we have anything else about this particular episode?
I'm excited to see where we go next.
The general cynicism of the show does pop up a few places in this episode. In particular, I think it's Christ, somebody else, like several characters call him insane, specifically because of the mental health stuff that he deals with.
Yes.
And in a specifically negative light. And I find this show's handling of mental illness so hard to classify. Like, it's not good and it's not bad. It's this strange third thing, both at the same time. It's one of those things where it's like, I think some of its missteps would be mostly fine if audiences were even mildly educated on mental illness, but they're not. So you got to be like even more careful about these topics. But I think also just a lot of the time it falls into general traps of like, ooh, kooky craziness, including for villains, right? Like it loves a good villain that's just mentally ill, vaguely. And I think that those are so like unfortunately embedded in sci-fi that if people aren't actively thinking about how that contributes to the perspective of the world on mentally ill people, it's not going to really register as much. And then there's, Crichton, who has this very sympathetic in some ways and very unempathetic in other ways representation of struggling with a sort of fictional mental illness that does reflect real world mental illnesses. And so, it falls into certain tropes and things of like, this person is inherently scary or dangerous because they deal with mental illness stuff. And then at other times, honestly represents like how that affects them in negative ways. It's I don't know how I feel about how this show handles mental illness. I would say generally it isn't great, but there's stuff in here that I really value. And then the other problem too is that I also have that thing of like, it feels like one of those works where I'm like, I think the good things that I'm getting out of this are as much in spite of the writing than anything else. And I think it also just helps that like John is such a likable character that giving him, especially in the position of such a prominent like main character role, severe mental illness that genuinely affects him for the entire show. Like this becomes a consistent thing that he deals with. We see multiple timelines where he grows old dealing with the effects of having the worst headmate in the world, Scorpius, introject. For people that don't understand those terms, I have a lot of friends who have the idea who are plural systems. An interject is a headmate that forms in a plural system that is based on a real person, or that person's sort of perspective of that real person. And so sort of accidentally, Harvey and Crichton's situation is like weird DID representation in some ways. Mm-hmm. And when you read it through that lens, there's some good and there's a lot of bad. Harvey really, in a lot of ways leans into the trope of like the evil headmate, the evil alter. You see this a lot in like horror movies. Basically, Psycho kind of popularized this as like a mainstay trope of person with multiple personalities and one of them's an evil crazy killer, and it's quite awful. And so Crichton kind of has that going on with Harvey because Harvey is an interject of the most lacking in morals man of all time, who specifically put this version of himself in Crichton's head to steal information from Crichton. And I think it's one of those things where the show could have actually ended up saying something nice and like based on what I know, and I'm not, I shouldn't be your final word on this or anything. But when it comes to further representation, like I don't think that you are completely out for having any sort of representation of how alters can be negative or conflicting with each other and things, because those do happen. I think that if Harvey got to like have a full redemption arc, which they kind of flirt with but never engage fully with, that could have worked. Because that could have really subverted a lot of elements of the sort of evil alter trope. And shown someone who is healing not by trying to remove this element of themselves, but by learning to live with it.
Embracing
it in a healthy way, by developing communication with their headmate and doing things like that. But for this episode specifically, like it's interesting because it also shows how much other people's perspectives on Crichton, can be informed by their prejudice towards someone being mentally ill. And I think that is an interesting choice. And again, like Crichton is so empathetically shown most of the time, at least when it comes to like them struggling with this stuff.
Yeah.
That it does do a better job of pretty much all of its contemporaries, because like if you look at media in the early 2000s to late 90s, it's not good about that topic.
Well,
No, it's not the best about that topic. To take from another show, like several actors from this show are on in SG-1. You have like the episode where Daniel gets like all of the minds of a civilization in his head, and they like directly compare it to DID, and they make some bad decisions in that one. Yeah, like literally one of the heavyweights is just like, I'm the evil crazy one, I want to do stab rings, and it's like whereas like
SG-1 is complicated.
In this case, like, yes, Scorpius falls into that like evil ethnic trope, like, which can be very dehumanizing towards mentally ill people. The stigma of mental illness as like making people more dangerous or violent obviously is like really, really, really harmful, and it's also not represented in the statistics, at least not in the way that people think it is. Basically, most of the difference between the general population and people with severe mental illness. So this isn't even everyone with mental illnesses. This is like the small subset of people where it could have some corollary effect. The difference is almost purely accounted for by the difference in rate of drug addiction, because drugs like alcohol and things just increase the rate of violence by like a huge margin. The majority of people that commit violent crimes are usually on alcohol, usually have substance abuse issues with alcohol. And that doesn't make them bad people either. The demonization of addiction is like extremely awful. I've had a lot of family members go through addiction, but the point is that like mentally ill people are not some special evil other. Violence doesn't come just from people being mentally ill. And same people, same quote unquote people are just as susceptible to the same influences and things and behaviors. So, yeah, it's just a thing of like, and then when you actually look at the numbers too, it's like the difference is between 0.8% of the population, general population, and 2.5% of people with severe mental illness, which at its highest estimation is about 6% of the population. So you're looking at 2.5% of 6% of the population versus 0.8% of the other 94%. One of those is committing crimes at a much larger magnitude by a pretty large margin. And so when you look at when you get into the nitty-gritty, the realities of it, like mentally ill people, like if you're going to get harmed by another human being, it is actually statistically unlikely that they are going to be a mentally ill person. And what's nice is that like for Crichton, at least here, even with the Harvey stuff and things, Crichton doesn't, any more so than any other the other characters in terms of just making bad decisions and mistakes, because everybody in the show makes mistakes because it's good writing. That's just good writing. But Crichton isn't like uniquely evil or bad or demonized fully by the narrative for struggling with mental illness, and I appreciate that at least.
The thing I like about the representation, I find that it feels very much like basically everyone in this world is suffering from some kind of trauma, depression, particularly everyone in the crew, and yet nobody is ever presented as unlovable. Nobody is ever excluded because of their, they care for one another. Even when they do bad things, Chiana has made a lot of bad decisions out of trauma. Yeah. And they are still always there for her and always caring for her. As has John. And Stark, Aaron, of course, is our probably most unhinged character.
Dargo, like so many of the characters. There isn't a character on the ship. Hell, even Pilot at some points. Like all of them are flawed people struggling to heal from stuff, and I think
even
that's
Moya.
Even Moya,
yeah,
true. There's several points where Moya makes decisions that, like cause problems for everybody else. No, it's a show that is willing to have complicated characters that are actually struggling with things and be honest about that, and then also show joy and show complexity, and not, it never dips into like trauma porning its characters with the struggles that they're having, but it also never dips into like sunshine, lollipops. It's pretty good at exploring things more holistically. You know, I mentioned that like one timeline we see where like Crichton gets stuck on that planet with the weird time stuff and like lives to an old age. You know, and he's still dealing with Harvey, but he's also like handling it much better than he used to, you know, and you've seen that like he's lived a full, pretty happy life with Aaron. And like that is not a representation you usually see for mentally ill people. Mentally ill people, either we die like graceful martyrs. Oh, so sad. They committed, you know, suicide for the benefit of the other people, and that's a noble sacrifice bullshit. Or, you know, they were evil and bad. They get thrown in the asylum. Like, there's not a lot of positive endings. There's not a lot of positive endings. It's sort of that thing of like, even with queer representation as well, you don't see a lot of like someone getting to just live to an old age and deal with this.
We did unfortunately have the sort of tragic one with Talon. There wasn't really a way to right that ship after everything.
There's a lot of poor choices with Talon, in my opinion, in the later seasons where they're like, and he went crazy bad. And it's like, why?
If you're going to have a tragic character, or at least having it be the ship is
That's the lesson. At least have it be the ship.
Yeah, it's not all characters are treated as, you know, tragic losses.
That's the other thing too, that I think it's like barrier gaze or so many other stereotypes. They're only usually a problem because the character exists in a vacuum. If there's only one queer character, if there's only one black character, if there's only one, you know, fat character, if there's only one disabled character, then they become, whether they like it or not, and whether the writers intended or not, they become a representation of a community.
Yeah.
That's just a reality of how the show will get perceived by audiences. That can be for the better and for the worse. But it means that when you only have one, if you kill your one queer character, that's a big problem.
Yeah.
If your queer character is one of a dozen of the cast, you can fucking kill them all day. And it's not like, oh, and we've lost all representation of queerness in the show. And also queer people are destined for a miserable life that ends in tragedy. You can have your tragic queer characters and not be bigoted too, is the thing. And yeah, like Talon does have that tragic end, but Talon isn't the only character that struggles with some form of mental illness. And I also feel like Talon's also the least, like, the mental illness stuff is the most removed from a human kind of concept. It's like, oh, there's a evil chip that's implanted, and it's like, okay, it's barely the same thing. There's enough distance there that I would say that people who would take harmful messaging from it are less likely to than they are to like get something positive out of, just because of Crichton, really, especially because he's so likable. Like, I don't understand Brand Barter only starred like Farscape, Stargate, because that man is like so charismatic as a lead, and you wouldn't normally hear me arguing for a cis white man getting more work, but like, sorry. But I'm like, this guy should be a leading star in shows still, because he's
very really
good, and he's able to do so many layers. Like, and even when he's
the man
playing,
can act.
The man can act. I mean, the fact that like Scorpius is a really great performance, and he can, like, every time it happens across the show, when he has to perform like Crichton Scorpius, he just fucking nails it. Like, he nails it so well.
He goes so like evil Brit with it. He has so much fun with
it's great. I also love like Chiana's actress as Stark in her performances that are like that she does a fun job with that.
They all killed it. I mean, as good as Ben is, I think Claudia is at least as good. I think that's
100%,
one of the things that they are so well balanced. And
I love that they very much trade aspects of their roles between Stargate and Farscape. Because in Farscape, like, Aaron's very much the like serious, and Crichton's very jokey and silly, and then you come over to Stargate and Mitchell's very serious, and what is her name?
Oh God, why did it fall out of my brain?
I have that problem. Like, when the instant I need to remember a name, my brain is just like, what name?
I can see all the outfits. Vana.
Vana, yeah,
yes.
I think so, yeah.
Yes. Of the many amazing outfits.
Yeah. Like
Vala.
Vala. Yeah. Sorry. But anyway, Vala.
ADHD
like,
brains.
Vala is so
It was fun to watch.
so charismatic and funny, and like never takes anything seriously, and it's just such a like she's such an amazing actress. Like, Claudia Black needs to be in way more stuff.
Absolutely.
Actors that like did not get the support they deserve. IMO.
Well, I think Claudia Black. There were a few reasons, a few things that she's an ADHDer like us. But and also she was a single mom, so.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I know she's been doing a lot of really cool voice work, which I think that's awesome. I'm glad that she's like still getting work. I'm just talking more about like getting to be the main person. I think her and like in a major series of some sort. I would love to see her and Ben Browder get more stuff like that.
Yes, very much so. And
like Browder's still working, but he is just doing like a lot of like small gigs. Like, I haven't seen any of these things.
I've seen him in a couple things come up, but of course he was in Guardians of the Galaxy, which it was heavily inspired by Farscape.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Guardians of the Galaxy is so wonderfully inspired by so many different things. Like, all three films, they pull from a lot of French sci-fi graphic novel work, Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets, and then they mix that with like Farscape and Star Wars and a few other things, and I think you get like, especially Guardians 2 and 3, just really lovely, like, bright colors. I'm still like impressed that James Gunn managed to do what he did with those films under Disney's boot heel, because really those films were like and they would have been better. Like, I'll just say that, like, if there aren't queer characters in those films, and it was definitely Disney's fault, is all I will intimate.
Everybody should watch Aranock and Jesse's video on Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah, everyone should watch her video on Guardians of the Galaxy. They should also watch her video on James Gunn's filmography that he's shared multiple times. And he endorses our very critical, like, full look at his entire work. Basically, we argue that all of his films are about him deconstructing his own toxic masculinity through characters, and he said yes, enthusiastically. And I was like, damn, like, no, but I really appreciate him as an artist, because I really appreciate him as an artist, because he's like, yeah, I've been a really shitty person at these times in my life, and I'm probably still doing shitty things, and I'm trying to grow and learn, and like is willing to apologize for making mistakes and stuff. And I also just love him because he's so, like, people have tried to cancel him multiple times. And he's just so over, like, cancel culture is even a term. And I'm like, yes, thank you. He's like, people literally try to destroy my career. This is not real. It's all.
Yeah. Anyway, we're getting away from the episode. I think we've.
Sorry, it's really easy for me to just talk about things.
You and I have had this before. we are very, very ADHD. So. Josh, are you ready to hear the title of the next episode?
Especially because of the cliffhanger that we ended on, and because of the last couple times we went to Earth, it ended badly. Yes.
Actually, I wonder if you could guess the title of the next episode. We just had him deciding that he is Dorothy Gale. What do you think the next episode might be called?
I couldn't begin to speculate. Put me out of my misery. Kansas.
It's
okay.
called Kansas. Yeah.
It's called
great.
Kansas. All right. Well, so yeah, we're fucked.
Yeah, all I'll say is Kansas might be one of my favorite reverse isekais ever. But it's like, yeah, John is so now of the world of the weird that it makes for a fun dynamic.
Yeah, we've got this is the first where we are now. We just did the first of the 3-part, and it's an excellent 3-parter. So we'll be doing
It's such a good 3-parter.
Yeah.
Part 2 is really fun. Part 3 is the part that I think is the strongest of the 3.
What is your favorite part of this episode? Aranock, would you care to go first?
I mean, there's a lot of good little moments, but I do think that big ending thing of like fear is the answer. Like, that's so good. That's just such a it's so fun because it condenses like everything about Crichton's flaws into a pinpoint spear just aimed right at him. Like, you are willing to risk everything and you're not even scared about it. Hey, that's not okay. Yeah.
Josh?
For me, it's definitely the water splashing the camera. Like, I got literal goosebumps when I was watching that.
That's such a good moment.
Yeah.
I love your analysis of that.
For me, I think it is Dargo's question. How much perspective have you lost?
Yeah.
That's such a banger.
I think pairs well with the fear is the correct answer.
Yeah.
It's such a setup payoff set of 2 like really good lines.
They do this very well on this show.
How much perspective have you lost?
No, like the setup
You've
payoff,
lost
like
fear.
Good. They do the setting and spiking very well in this show.
I love a good set spike. Like when you're writing, there's nothing better than stuff that's set up in chapter 1 and paid off in chapter 57. Like,
yeah,
that is such a good feeling. And again, like very much, Dorothy's not from Kansas anymore. Dorothy's from Oz, and Dorothy's going back to Kansas.
Yeah, his whole like list of I am not Kirk, I'm not Buck Rogers, I am Dorothy Gale from Kansas.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is another of my favorite moments because it's
Are you anymore? At this point, like
it's this embracing of I am the fish out of water, I am the lost person, I am not in control here.
Well, and also I think there's such an important element right there of vulnerability. He's comparing himself to a child, like who is out of her depth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's rejecting the placement of himself as like that monomythic figure, right? He lists, manly men types who lead, who are powerful, who control the narrative in some way.
Yes.
And then he says, I'm a little girl that's just kind of stumblingly surviving in a world I don't understand. Because like Dorothy doesn't, like Dorothy doesn't really exhibit or have much agency in her story.
No, she does not.
She just kind of stumbles into these things, which is also why I find Wizard of Oz and everything like it kind of interesting, because it also doesn't really fit like the rule structure of Hero's Journey at all either.
Have you, Aranock, made a Fuck Campbell video yet?
How many?
They've made several.
Okay,
between
cool. I'm gonna
Aranock and Jesse between them.
Yeah. All right.
I think it's become sort of like autistic special interest level of obsessive about like narrative structures. No, because and there's a reason why like I am the person known for being good at like structure when it comes to narrativizing and writing video essays or whatever. Like I structure things in ways that people don't think about, and I think it's because my brain cannot stand the story. Like rules, that you're like, oh, you're supposed to do it like this. And I'm like, no, the structure works way better if you do this. That is this weird, wibbly wobbly, timey wimey.
Queer the narrative, queer everything.
Which queers the structure and queers the narrative. But I find it so interesting again with this show of like, here is what should quintessentially be your classic, man is maker of meaning character.
Yes.
Square-jawed,
Right.
all-American hero.
And Crichton
Even an
is
astronaut.
almost always completely out of his depth, completely out of autonomous control. Like, there's so Crichton, almost more than any other character, gets their autonomy taken a lot.
Let me
I
tell
would
you.
say for the men, anyway. The women
Yeah.
have it way too often. It's really gross in certain episodes. The fucking sex planet one. Anyway,
Yeah, there's a couple of times where it's done really gross with John too.
there's some really gross stuff with John. But my point is that like John does stand out relative to the rest of the cast, especially the other men, in terms of like struggling with agency. And I think there's something really, again, coming back to the mental illness thing, especially because I think that's the point where he struggles the most with having agency and autonomy. And like, I find that really relatable, and I really like that they do that with John. But it also, yeah, like it means that he doesn't really fit into those narrative structures and those myths. And I think that's why John Crichton is probably like the most interesting white man protagonist from sci-fi. Like,
because he's intensely masculine, but not in the way you expect, not in a way that masculinity is usually done. You know, he is so vulnerable.
That's a certificate. That's a plaque. That's a ribbon to give him right there.
Oh yeah,
The most interesting.
I adore him. I adore him. Like I would say, I guess the only other one that could sort of compete is Data, but Data's like not a human, you know, so like in presentation. He is human and that he's a person, and I will fight anyone on this. And I hate when the writers also go like, no, Data is not a person. They must have an emotion chip if they're going to pretend to have feelings. And I'm like, have you watched the show? Data had feelings the whole time. They just weren't understood. I've been writing the Data section of Androids Are Never Androids. And so I've just been thinking about this a lot the last couple of days. But Data, like, fascinates me as a metaphor for marginalization, particularly autism, because he's sometimes like so good and then sometimes so bad.
I think for me, the closest for interesting white male, although whether he's really white in the coding, would be Garrick. Or not Garrick. Well, no, Garrick. Yes, Garrick is very interesting, but Jakar, different G. Jakar from Babylon 5.
Right. Yeah. I feel like, again, far enough away because he's got the makeup and everything, right? Like he's got this.
Yeah. Is he white or is he a representation?
He's a representation of a marginalized person, but I think for interesting masculine characters, interesting journeys of masculinity, I would put Jakar.
Yeah, I would say like,
and of course Dargo, who is my big old.
But again, like I feel like Dargo is presented full alien. You know what I mean? In the same way that like Saru from Discovery is full alien. You know,
I love Saru.
I love Saru, and I fucking love Doug Jones. I love Doug Jones so much. He's one of my favorite performers. He's been one of my favorite performers since I was a little kid because I loved behind the scenes stuff, and so I just got really into like who he was as a performer because of his monster stuff. And like, yeah, he's so cool. And Saru is so well performed. I love that they like really struggled to have any other Kelpians because no one else could like as perfectly do the like weird body motion stuff that Doug Jones can do. But yeah, like I would say for like presents as a cis white human man, Crichton is probably the most interesting because he's so layered and flawed and, you know, healing and struggling. And I think the characters like in good writing often like the struggle is what makes them so interesting and how they deal with that struggle. And I like characters with friction, and Farscape is full of characters with so much friction and it's great. Like, yeah, I think a character is always better if it has an unlikable trait. And everybody on the crew of the Moya has some unlikable thing that they do or say or feel, some way more than others. Rigel Coffin. Oh, Rigel.
Okay, well, we have talked for a long time, so we should probably bring it to a close. So Aranock, would you like to tell the folks where they can find you and what you're working on?
Aranock, pretty much everywhere. Aranock. It's just my name, and I use it for all my social media accounts. The next stuff that you'll see from me is going to be on Jesse's channel. It's stuff that we worked on together. And I'm starting work on another video for my channel because I've just been busy with work for Jesse the last little while. But one of the things that we did together is already up, which is a piece on the monomyth. Relevant. I think the YouTube title is
The stories that white
supremacists tell. I
So,
think is the current YouTube title. Again, it's hard because like actual title of a script versus what you need to do for YouTube marketing, you know, and Jesse will try different stuff. So sometimes the title will change on me. But if you go to Jesse Jenner's channel, it should be one of the most recent videos. Should be pretty easy to tell which one it is. I'd also recommend our Star Wars video. Don't watch it all in one go. It's 6 hours, but it's like a mini series. Like it's a huge, we put a lot of production into it. I did 18 minutes of animation.
It's a movie.
Like traditional animation. No, like I do truly, it should be watched like you know this like our sort of documentary miniseries would be like 3 2-hour pieces. That's kind of how you should treat it. Like it is a big work,
and
but it earns its length. It's not repeating. I worked so hard to cut that down.
And previous podcast guest Vera Wild does a voice in that as well, I think. Yeah. And also on your chat, like if for folks who liked this discussion, you should absolutely check out the queer relativity, and the Matrix is intrinsically trans.
Mm-hmm.
I think both excellent. I mean, all your videos.
I'd also really shout out my I saw the TV Glow video from end of last year.
Which I need to watch now that I've watched the film.
It's definitely relevant to this conversation. But like, yeah, fair warning. My videos are known for making people cry. That's so like watch them when you're ready for something really emotional. That's not like, it's to the point that there's like in jokes in my audience about it. Particularly, yay, it's crying time, which was one of my favorite comments I've ever gotten is someone like within the first couple minutes of a video uploading going, yay, it's crying time, all caps, exclamation points. And I'm like, oh no, is this what I'm doing to you all? It is very funny to like emotionally dom a bunch of people as a bot. I'm sorry, that's a really dumb joke.
I believe
on
it
the
is
subject of
really
dumb
jokes.
joke. And on the subject of dumb jokes, Josh, where can people find you?
I'm over on Instagram pretty much exclusively. Not exclusively, but that's all the only place that I am at this point. And at Josh Gosdin, come over, find me. We hang out. We talk about self-care. I cook. And yeah. Sara, what about you?
I'm Sara Ezzat. I make the Fat Culture Critic videos on YouTube. I hopefully will have edited and uploaded the one I'm working on just now, which is a video I recorded talking about why, to me, as a cis person, trans media matters, and calling out some specific pieces that I think show how, like, is such an important perspective that we need. And it's not just, yes, we need to protect trans people, but we also need to value trans people. Yeah. I'm trying to stick with things the more on the sort of positive side of things, and this is my way of being positive while also being resistance, is to be like, let's love the people who are being, so
honestly, like if people put 1/10 of the energy they put into like arguing with bigots online or something into like actually being helpful to any queer people in their community, it would make a big difference. I'm just saying. I don't know. I care a lot more about the people who are focused on supporting and loving trans people than the people who are like, I'm a great ally. I argued with the TERF online. I'm like, you wasted your time
Yeah. Just block them, move on, and
Like,
yeah.
yeah, and probably subjected all of your audience to said transphobic comments. When you quote post things, you subject everyone to seeing it.
Yeah. Yeah. So
No,
that's
I'm really appreciate that you're making that video.
yeah. I've been having and one of your pieces is one of the pieces I shout out. Um, so the one about with Alison Bechdel and moms and things.
I love that video. I'm really sad that Alison Bechdel's like kind of derpy. Recently learned that. I was like, that's cool.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I used to admire Stephen Fry.
Hey,
not anymore.
Neil Gaiman was one of my favorite writers.
That was my last video, which included me throwing his books against the wall.
It's so frustrating. I mean, I'm generally of the opinion of like the things that you get from art is as much a reflection of you as the art itself. And like, as long as you're not giving money to scumbags, you're not doing anything wrong with engaging with art that's been written by shitty people, because the reality is most art is written by someone who has something shitty about them that you disagree with. And, no heroes. Don't put people on pedestals.
No heroes. But I think for personally me, it was like he's too much a part of his work that I just can't engage in that anymore. It just like
that's so understandable.
So
yeah, I think it's a thing of like an artist is always going to be in their art. I don't think you can ever separate art from the artist, and I think it's kind of gross to try. Honestly, even against shitty artists, I'm like erasing the human contribution and stuff isn't helpful. I think there's times where art escapes the artist's intent completely. The Room, for example. I think The Room is a brilliant piece about a sexist man and his ego, and the issues with it. Like, The Room is one of the most unintentionally self-critical works of art ever made.
Yeah.
I don't think reading should like matter on the intent, but I do think that like, it's you can never really fully erase the contributions of the person that made a work of art, and so it's more of a question of like, how do you engage with that art while understanding that person's perspective?
And I think it can be interesting as a sort of intellectual exercise to try and read it without to read text only, but like that's not the only way to read work. Anyway, that's the thing I'm working on. But
no, I agree with that. I also find like a lot of times
various other stuff. Anyway. We should do the outro.
Yeah, we should do the outro. Sorry.
I'm sorry, Josh.
Josh is fine. I'm literally like I'm in school right now. I'm fine.
Okay. Well, so we are going to do a reaction to this next coming episode and to the one after it, time permitting. And that will be for our Patreon supporters. So if you want to see our reactions, then follow the links. You can find us at Muppet Sex and Trauma at Patreon.com, and there's also the Discord, or you can email us if you want comments. We're not going to do comments from our listeners in this one because we have been talking for nearly 2 hours. But no, it's great. We will find some time to do comments for our listeners for another episode, I'm sure, and if not, then if we end up with a whole bunch, we'll just do a Q&A episode at one point. So yeah, we'll see about that. So yeah, in 2 weeks, join us, and thank you, Aranock, for being with us today. This was a lot of fun. The minute I saw you blue skying about watching Farscape, I was like, oh my god, we got to get you on.
I had a lot of fun watching the show. I think overall, good show. Aged weird. Not bad, just weird.
Yeah, that's yeah. These are how you describe Farscape: Muppet Sex and Trauma, aged weird. So yeah, with that, everyone take care, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.
No, he really is like he's like the himbo stereotype, the ultimate himbo, the maximum himbo. I love him. Like
Himboist.
himboist himbo that ever himbo for real. Yeah. No, I think Crichton's such an interesting character because he breaks a lot of basic stereotypes of the type of character he is. You know, yes, he's the quippy, like kind of action hero person, but he's also like deeply traumatized.
Yeah, that was it.
Very messed up by the experiences that he goes through. He's like a jock, but he's also like a huge dorky nerd at the same time, and so he manages to be both stereotypes in this like quantum superposition.